The first Karate Kid was one of my favorite movies growing up. It was essentially Rocky for a younger audience. Not that we as a younger audience didn't watch Rocky anyway, but yeah, Karate Kid is a formulaic underdog tale about a teenager named Daniel LaRusso, played by Ralph Macchio, who trains with the iconic Mr. Miyagi, played by Pat Morita, in order to defend himself against his bullies and the ex-boyfriend of his main squeeze in a karate tournament. The movie did so well it birthed a franchise that lives on today through the Cobra Kai television series. Despite the NES game being titled simply Karate Kid, it's based more directly on the sequel, Karate Kid Part 2. In that one, Mr. Miyagi heads back to Okinawa to visit his dying father, and Daniel comes with, only to end up caught in a whirlwind of kung fu drama and eventually faces off against one of Miyagi's old rivals who still holds a grudge. Now that you're all caught up, let's jump into Karate Kid and wax on. Karate Kid on NES has a reputation for being hard, and it certainly can be, but that's mostly because it's, not good. It can be very frustrating, but you really only need to know two things to make it through this one. The first is to only kick, and the second is to remember that only two enemies can be on screen at a time. If I had known this when I was 9 and rented this game, gosh, maybe my life could have turned out differently. Yeah, probably not. The game is terribly short, with only 4 stages. A complete run of it can take you about 10 minutes. But if you're out here punching dudes or fighting every enemy on screen, then you're going to have a bad time. And really, you're not going to have a good time regardless, so don't make it worse on yourself. Even though there are only 4 stages, all 4 do tie directly to the second film. You start out exactly where the first movie ends and the second begins, which is hobbled and kicking butt in a karate tournament. All you have to do is time your kicks right to dispatch every enemy, even old Johnny. Now say hello to Okinawa. Every 4 or so enemies you take out, you'll see a C or a D pop up on screen depending on how you attacked those enemies. Picking these up will give you some energy and add 1 to your limited number of crane kicks or drum punches. Remember though, never punch. Only kick in this game. Crane kicks are where it's at, and I like to save 3 or 4 for the end of the level to use against the bosses. To crane kick, you simply kick while standing still and pressing no other buttons. It's weird in that it's easier to use the more powerful attack than it is the regular one, but you don't want to crane kick every time and use them all up, so kicking butt while on the move is preferred. And even if I'm not moving forward, I typically time a forward press of the D-pad in line with when I kick so to land a deliberate blow and not waste one of those precious crane kicks. In the first side-scrolling level, it's good to keep things slow and methodically work your way right while throat-kicking bad guys and hoarding crane kick power-ups. All 3 platforming levels in the game suffer from cluttered graphics where it can be difficult to tell what is okay to stand on and what actually isn't there, so be mindful. Oh, and another thing about this game, it's one of those where A and B punch and kick, and jumping requires pressing up on the directional pad. That typically annoys me, but it's actually not terrible here. There are chasms all over, and these are surefire death traps if you try to engage an enemy over one, as one hit causes Daniel to go straight down, so never fight near a hole. That's a lesson for Karate Kid and for your day-to-day life in general. Once you reach the end of the level, you just simply crane kick the boss to death by standing still and pressing B over and over. It's remarkably easy. The second level is a tough one because of all the gosh dang wind. Where in the first stage it was beneficial to take it slow, here it's worth it to try to cover some ground whenever possible. Now remember, when I said one important tip for this game is knowing that only 2 enemies can appear on screen at a time, you can use that to your advantage in this and the next stage by trying to get 2 of the enemies behind you and let them follow you. When this happens, you don't have to engage enemies in front of you because none will appear. It's an easy to discover and easy to exploit limitation of the game. Sure, it's cheesy, but the game isn't holding back on being a jerk. If you get caught between 2 enemies, you'll bounce off them and continuously take damage as there are no invincibility frames for recovery. It's massively frustrating when it happens and is the biggest reason most of us return this to the rental store with disapproving glares to the guy who let us go home with it without so much as a warning it would suck. So, cheese the game right back, I say. At the end of the stage, you fight the boss and climb the tower to rescue Kimiko, just like in the movie. The next stage is really more of the same, except with tougher enemies who have spears. Cheese them if you want, by getting them behind you, or take them head on, but they're really tough. The final bout is as easy as the rest if you have stockpiled your crane kicks like a good Karate Kid. And then that's it. That's Karate Kid the game, you beat it. Now you can earn some more energy in crane kicks and drum punches throughout the levels by ducking into the secret bonus stages scattered around. There are 3 different mini-games you can play here, each taken from scenes in the movie. The first is breaking through ice blocks in a single chop, where you time the meter at the top for your chop power. The second is catching flies with chopsticks, which is surprisingly easier than it looks and just as gross. And then there's the swinging hammer part, which is extremely tough to time. There's a reason Mr. Miyagi was hesitant to let Daniel-san try this in the movie. The timing is tough to nail, but if you are able to dodge it 6 times in a row, you get a nice bonus. Each of the secret doors can only be popped into once, but there are several littered around, so you'll have plenty of opportunity. Ultimately, Karate Kid isn't a great game. The enemies are too cheesy to make a fair fight fun, and the game is too easy to cheese to be fun after you figure out how to exploit it. And it's terribly short, with just 4 total stages. On the plus side, there are 2 multiplayer modes. The first lets you take turns playing through the campaign with someone else, which has a limited fun potential, but there is also a head-to-head karate option that might be worth checking out. Each stage does its own music, and the music is fitting for a Karate Kid game, and I'll give it credit for hitting on the movie beats a bit and making them recognizable. At least it's not out of left field like some other movie tie-in games are. Even graphically, the game is okay, save for a lot of that ground clutter. Now ultimately, the only reason to play this one for enjoyment these days is if it bullied you, and you need to train a bit to overcome it, like Daniel-san did with Johnny in that first movie. Just remember though, it's okay to sweep the leg and cheese it right back. Otherwise, this one isn't worth heading to Okinawa over. There are a few other Karate Kid games around. The Karate Kid Part 2, the computer game, was a head-to-head fighting game for the Amiga and Atari ST, released the same year as the movie, and it reviewed surprisingly well back in the day. More recently though, there's Cobra Kai, the Karate Kid saga continues, a 2D side-scrolling beat-em-up that came to Switch, PS4, Xbox One, and Windows back in 2020. Well, that's going to do it for Karate Kid on the NES. As always, you're going to want to wash those chopsticks now. And thanks for watching.